The scarcity principle. Rejection signals immediate exclusion from a resource or social circle. The brain perceives this as a sharp decline in market value. Primitive neural pathways interpret social dismissal as a death sentence. Evolution favored those who feared isolation. However, the sophisticated manipulator understands that rejection also creates an immediate perception of scarcity. By accepting a rejection with zero emotional friction, you invert the power dynamic. You signal that the resource offered by the other party is non-essential to your survival. This nonchalance triggers the rejector's internal alarm systems. They expected a plea for inclusion. Instead, they receive a clinical indifference that suggests you have superior alternatives elsewhere. You turn your sudden unavailability into a premium asset. You transform a loss into a high-value signal through sheer emotional absence. Cognitive dissonance begins to erode the rejector's confidence almost immediately. They must justify why they discarded something that seems so entirely unbothered by the loss. Human nature dictates that we desire what we cannot possess or influence. By removing your presence without a fight, you become an unattainable object. The rejector begins to question their own judgment. They wonder if they miscalculated your worth. Studies in behavioral economics show that subjects value rare items significantly higher than abundant ones. Rejection provides the rarest form of social interaction, the one that cannot be repeated or bargained for. You occupy a space in their mind that compliance could never reach. You are now the one who is scarce. The rejected party becomes the mystery. The initiator becomes the pursued. This is the irony of human desire. We only value what has the power to leave us behind. Reactive autonomy. Rejection functions as a potent biological fuel. It triggers a massive surge of cortisol and adrenaline. Most individuals allow this chemical cocktail to paralyze their executive functions. They spiral into self-pity and social withdrawal. The high performer utilizes this spite to bypass the standard limits of human endurance. This is the dark side of motivation. It is not driven by passion or vision. It is driven by the cold necessity to invalidate the rejector's perception. This state of reactive autonomy allows for hyperfocus. You strip away all distractions. Every action serves one purpose: the systematic dismantling of the rejector's reality. You do not seek their approval. You seek their silence. You transform a social wound into a functional engine. The ego demands a correction of the perceived injustice. You use that demand to fuel an unrelenting work cycle. Psychologists observe that spite is a more sustainable long-term motivator than positive reinforcement. Positive rewards offer diminishing returns as dopamine receptors habituate to the stimulus. Rejection provides a consistent, nagging irritation that prevents complacency. It is the friction that generates the necessary heat for high-level output. By focusing on the objective rather than the insult, you achieve a state of clinical efficiency. You stop being a person and start being a process. The results of this process eventually become undeniable. When you achieve success from a position of total exclusion, you own that success entirely. No one can claim credit for your elevation. You have built a fortress out of the opposition you encountered. The rejector is forced to witness your ascent from the periphery of your life. This is the paradox of rejection. It provides the isolation necessary to build a power that is truly unshakable and independent. Emotional desensitization. The fear of rejection is a greater inhibitor than rejection itself. This fear creates a state of perpetual social paralysis. You analyze every word. You curate every gesture. You become a slave to the potential judgment of others. The elite mind views rejection as a form of biological inoculation. Each no is a microdose of social poison. Over time, the system develops a profound immunity. You stop reacting to the sting. You observe the rejection as a data point rather than a personal failure. This creates a terrifying level of social freedom. When you no longer fear the exit, you control the room. You can take risks that others find unthinkable. You can speak truths that others find unspeakable. You operate outside the standard reward-punishment loops of the herd. You become a psychological anomaly in a world of desperate pleasers. Systematic desensitization is a clinical tool used to treat phobias. Applying this to social rejection yields a predator-like calm in high-stakes environments. You recognize that the social hierarchy is largely an illusion maintained by mutual insecurity. Once you are comfortable being an outcast, you are no longer subject to the rules of the hierarchy. You gain the ability to probe for weaknesses without fear of the consequences. You treat every interaction as an experiment. If the outcome is negative, the experiment is simply complete. There is no emotional debt to be paid. This emotional flatlining allows for a level of charisma that is both detached and magnetic. People are drawn to those who do not need them. By embracing the frequency of rejection, you remove the only leverage the world has over you. Total indifference is the ultimate expression of personal sovereignty in a judgmental world. The mirroring deficit. Rejection provides a rare window into the rejector's own psychological landscape. When someone dismisses you, they reveal their own biases, insecurities, and internal limits. Most people focus on what they did wrong. The strategist focuses on what the rejector is trying to protect. Rejection is often a defensive mechanism. It is a boundary drawn to hide a perceived weakness or a lack of capacity. By analyzing the specific tone and timing of the rejection, you gain actionable intelligence. You see the gaps in their logic. You see the points where they felt threatened. This information is more valuable than any compliance could ever be. A positive response closes the inquiry. A negative response provides a detailed structural analysis of the other party's social filters. You use this data to refine your approach for future targets. You learn exactly where the social resistance is thinnest and most vulnerable. This clinical analysis removes the ego from the equation entirely. You stop viewing the rejector as a judge and start viewing them as a specimen. Every rejection is a diagnostic report on the current state of the social market. If you are rejected by a low-value individual, it confirms your trajectory. If you are rejected by a high-value individual, it highlights a specific lack in your presentation. You adjust your social mask accordingly. You do not feel emotional distress when a data point indicates a negative environmental condition. You simply change your strategy to compensate for the findings. This objective detachment allows you to manipulate future outcomes with mathematical precision. You learn to anticipate objections before they are even formed. The person who rejected you has unwittingly handed you the keys to their own defeat. Rejection is the most honest feedback you will ever receive. The pivot strategy. Rejection is a forced redirection of energy. Most individuals waste this energy by trying to push through a locked door. They beg, bargain, and plead. This is a low-status behavior that further decreases their perceived value. The high-retention mind uses the momentum of the rejection to pivot immediately toward a new objective. You treat the rejection as a hard boundary that clarifies your path. It eliminates options that were destined to fail. This saves you months or years of wasted effort. You take the accumulated tension and channel it into a secondary, more profitable venture. This is the strategic use of redirected momentum. You do not stop. You merely change the angle of your attack. The suddenness of your departure leaves the rejector in a state of confusion. They expected a lingering presence. Instead, they find you are already succeeding elsewhere without a backward glance. This rapid reallocation of resources is the hallmark of a dominant psychology. It demonstrates an absence of emotional attachment to specific outcomes. You are committed to the goal, not the path. When one path is blocked, the energy flows into the next one with increased velocity. This makes you impossible to stop. You are an adaptive system that recalibrates after every failure. The rejection becomes the very force that propels you toward a better opportunity. In many cases, the secondary objective proves to be far more lucrative or powerful than the first. You realize that the rejection was a stroke of luck disguised as a setback. It prevented you from settling for a mediocre result. By the time the rejector realizes their mistake, you have already moved beyond their reach. This is the fatalistic truth of the pivot. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being told you are not wanted. Ego death benefit. The human ego is a fragile construct designed to protect the self-image. It is the primary obstacle to true power. Rejection serves as a brutal but necessary form of ego stripping. It shears away the delusions of grandeur and the false sense of entitlement. When you are rejected, you are forced to confront the reality of your current standing. This is a painful process, but it is clinically essential for growth. A bloated ego makes you predictable and easy to manipulate. A stripped ego makes you dangerous. You become lean, focused, and objective. You no longer care about looking important. You only care about being effective. You trade the illusion of status for the reality of competence. This transition allows you to operate in the shadows where the real decisions are made. You stop performing for an audience that does not exist. You start building for a future you can control. This internal restructuring changes your entire presence. When you have nothing left to protect, you have everything to gain. The fear of embarrassment vanishes. The need for external validation disappears. You become an undetectable presence, moving through social spaces without leaving a trail of needy energy. People sense this lack of ego and find it deeply unsettling yet strangely compelling. They are used to dealing with people who are constantly trying to bolster their own image. Your lack of pretension makes you an enigma. You are able to see things as they truly are, rather than how your ego wants them to be. This clarity is a superpower in a world blinded by vanity. The final irony is that by losing your ego to rejection, you gain the respect your ego was so desperate to obtain. The man who needs nothing from anyone is the only one who can truly have everything. Social dominance realignment. Rejection is a test of your internal hierarchy. Most people allow the rejector to set their internal value. If they are rejected, they feel low value. This is a fundamental error in psychological accounting. The superior mind uses rejection to realign their own internal dominance. You decide that the rejection is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but a reflection of the rejector's limited vision. You move from a position of seeking entry to a position of granting access. You create your own social circle where you are the arbiter of value. This is the outsider advantage. By being rejected from the mainstream, you are forced to innovate. You build a parallel power structure that eventually rivals the one that excluded you. History is filled with outcasts who return to conquer the very systems that threw them away. Rejection is simply the first step in the creation of a new elite. This shift in perspective requires a total abandonment of conventional social logic. You must accept the status of the pariah to gain the power of the revolutionary. When you are no longer trying to fit in, you stop being a cog in someone else's machine. You become the engine of your own design. This independence is the ultimate form of social dominance. You do not compete for a seat at their table. You build your own table and watch them clamor for an invitation. The rejector eventually realizes that by casting you out, they lost their influence over you. They freed you from the constraints of their expectations. They gave you the permission to become their superior. This is the paradoxical nature of exclusion. The more a system tries to push you down, the more it provides the leverage you need to rise above it. True power is never granted by the group. It is taken by the individual. Selective vulnerability trap. Once you have mastered the art of absorbing rejection, you can use it as a tactical weapon. This is the dark side of social engineering. You deliberately put yourself in positions where you are likely to be rejected for minor things. You act as if the rejection hurts you slightly, showing a controlled flash of vulnerability. This triggers a deep-seated guilt response in the rejector. Humans are biologically wired to feel discomfort when they cause social pain. This guilt creates a psychological debt. The rejector now feels an unconscious need to compensate for their harshness. You then leverage this debt to secure a much larger, more significant concession later. They will say yes to the big request to make up for the no they gave to the small one. You turn a tactical loss into a strategic victory. You manipulate the rejector's empathy to bypass their rational defenses. This technique requires a high degree of emotional acting and clinical detachment. You must maintain the illusion of being affected while remaining entirely cold inside. It is a form of reverse psychology that exploits the rejector's desire to see themselves as a good person. By allowing them to reject you, you grant them a momentary feeling of power. By appearing hurt, you take that power back and turn it into an obligation. This creates a cycle where they are constantly trying to balance the scales. They become easier to manage because they are focused on their own moral self-image rather than your actual goals. You are the architect of their guilt. You use their rejection of you as a hook to pull them exactly where you want them. The ultimate irony of rejection is that the person doing the rejecting is often the one being played. In the theater of human behavior, the victim is frequently the puppeteer.